Hey everyone, welcome back to the Not Just Politics podcast. The following is a conversation with Professor Dean Ankeny. He is the Dean of the School of Communications at Point Park University. We sat down to discuss Point Park student life and COVID's effect on the campus, as well as living during the Trump era of politics and more. I really enjoyed sitting down with him. He's a really great guy, a very passionate leader, and I really think that he cares a lot about the students, and he really wants to make this university a better place. I am very grateful for him and his time, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Well, if we're ready, let's just jump into it. Professor, welcome back. It's been almost a year.
Wow.
October 6th was when we dropped your episode, and that was the first episode we ever did.
I was honored to be part of the first episode, and you're making me feel old. It was a year ago. I was thinking it was more like 6 months.
Yeah, I know. Well, it was October 6th. They're not quite a year, but we're getting there. We'll be there soon enough. Yeah.
It's an exciting time to be back on campus. So
it is.
Can't wait to catch up.
Yeah. And you've got, I saw before we recorded, you brought some notes here with you.
I
got
do.
Some stuff.
If you have me for a class, what you'll notice is I have notes.
Yeah, I remember.
I script the class.
Yep.
And the first time as a graduate student when I taught class, I saw someone go to class and be unprepared and run out of material after about 10 or 12 minutes.
Oh, no.
And watching the last 40, 50 minutes of a class where the person hadn't put the time and effort and thought about the content and thought about what the goal of the class was really, really painful to watch. So I never wanted to be that person. So whenever I do teach at Point Park, I'm always prepared with about an hour and a half of notes, but I have more than that. And whenever I do a media interview, the same thing. I don't want to be that person on air. What should I say? What should I say?
Yep.
I'm just gonna, wing it because that doesn't turn out very well.
Yeah, that's one of the tricky parts about doing this sometimes is you always have to be ready to improvise a little bit, be on your feet. Yeah, I remember whenever we had a class together with you freshman year. We had media and society, and I always remember you always had stuff ready to go. Like you always had, the next thing was always teed up.
Media and society is a fun class.
It was a fun class.
It's an introductory class, but you get college credit for doing things like listening to War of the Worlds.
Yep.
You get college credit for watching Gilligan's Island and talking about how that show shaped how television developed in the 1960s. You get to create your own advertising campaign for Point Park. So I think kids learn a lot of history. I think they learn a lot of communication theory, but I also think they walk away saying, I came to Point Park as a broadcast student. I know about the industry. I know the jobs that exist. I know how the industry is changing, and I'm going to be ready for those changes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was, I really did enjoy that class, and I do want to get to some of that stuff you touched on media-wise later. But I guess first, I do want to open the floor to you. We did talk about the fact that you've got some School of Communications stuff going on. So lay it all on me.
Yeah, I think it's a really, really exciting time to come to Pittsburgh, to come to Point Park, to the School of Communication. One of the things that I'm most excited about this fall is we are bringing back live sports. Before COVID, going back 6, 7, 8 years, WPPJ, our radio station, UView, our TV station, had to give that up. And when I interviewed for the dean job, I talked about creating a sports communication major, and it's become one of our biggest majors already. And I feel you have to be able to do live sports. So we're going to be doing live Point Park athletics on WPPJ, and we're building to do live sports on UView this fall. When I meet with prospective students and their families, I talk about how you can get involved with student media from day one.
Yeah.
And coming to Point Park, 18 years old, 19 years old, and helping with a live sports broadcast within a month of coming to campus, I think that's a pretty awesome experience. So that's what we want to create.
Yeah, I think that is a pretty special thing. And honestly, over at esports, we've been talking about how we want to get more students into casting, shoutcasting games. And the one thing we run into is that students haven't really had that experience of like learning how to talk on the mic, how to analyze, even though they might play the game that they're casting. Shoutcasting it is something entirely different. So I think that's really cool. Like we were looking into seeing if we could get some sort of training in that sort of regard, and that would be really cool.
We have a new graduate assistant who just joined our program, who I'll introduce you to later today through an email, who actually has some background and some history and some work experience doing live esports.
That'd be great.
So I think she'll add a lot to that as well.
Yeah, that's cool. I also think that would be good. I think the live sports thing would be good because I've gotten the sense, and I'm not a big sports person, so I'm guilty of this myself, but I guess for a different reason of like, I don't feel like there's as much engagement with our sports teams as we could have. And so I think that would be a great way to get that started for sure.
Doing a live UView broadcast, let's say a basketball, where you have play-by-play and you have color and you have sideline reporters and you have a production team. If kids learn all those things, there are phenomenal opportunities.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, it's also a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Doing live sports is just a lot of fun. So I think that's going to be a big enhancement to our program. And I think our sports communication students are going to be really excited about it.
Yeah, I'm not doing it this year, but I was shoutcasting Rocket League with Brett Powers. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
I am not.
Broadcast production student. Shout out to him. But we were shoutcasting Rocket League together, and that was always a lot of fun. I loved doing that. There was something about like that was a relatively simple start to like I'd never shoutcasted anything before. He dragged me there. I think like the first week that I was here freshman year, I wasn't supposed to be at esports, and he called me and he said they're making me do this alone. Just come shoutcast Rocket League with me. And I went. Now I've been there for 2 years.
I think one of the great things, I love when I hear a story like that. I think one of the great things about Point Park is this. When I taught other places, if you wanted to get involved with student media as a first-year student, as a sophomore, as a junior, you oftentimes had to wait. That's how it is at large state schools with 20, 30, 40,000 students. There are just so many kids. The TV station is a private club. And as a first-year student, you don't have those opportunities. At Point Park, the second you walk on this campus, if you want to get involved in UView, if you want to get involved with WPPJ, the Glow, Point Park Athletics, you have those opportunities. During COVID, I met a Point Park student on the elevator fall of 2020. It's when campus was just really barren. And she told me she was a broadcasting student, and she was going to a UView meeting. That student got actively involved in UView as a first-year student, and as a sophomore moved to a leadership role. And I feel if you work for our student media for 3 or 4 years and leave with 3 internships, you're going to blow away your competition after graduation.
Yeah, it would seem like that's how that's going to go. And honestly, like even be able to do this, like being able to have access to this space, like starting a podcast, like you can do it the second you get here. And you can book the space, you can come in. And Tanner and Wayne are fantastic. Those guys are the best. Like they have given us so much help in like running this thing and helping us get acclimated to this space. So yeah, I think that a lot of times when I tell people about that's I think one of the the biggest benefits of Point Park from a media standpoint is like just having access to that stuff right away.
I think another thing that's really, really important is that when I started as dean, our cameras to support radio and television and the Globe were just dated. And about a year ago, we got $130,000 in new cameras, and these cameras are just exceptional. So when you come here and you need to sign out a camera, you're using industry standard. You're not using something that looks like I found it at a flea market in Harrisburg somewhere. These are really, really good cameras.
Yeah, I think that's that's also a cool thing, is like being able to go to student production services and like rent out a camera. Is that what you're talking about with student production services? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a cool thing too.
Now, one of the things that we didn't talk about last time, and I feel over the next 5 years is going to be one of the most important things to have happened in the School of Communication, is the faculty voted last year to pursue ACE JMC accrediting. There are about 105, 106 accredited communication programs in the country. In Pennsylvania, the only accredited programs are Temple, Penn State, and Shippensburg.
Okay.
So Point Park plans to become the 4th accredited program and the first one in Western Pennsylvania. This
That's
is
great.
a huge deal. We're talking about a club of about 105, 106. So I've always viewed the School of Communication as one of the best in the country. And now we'll have an outside accreditor come in, and I believe we'll confirm that we're one of the best in the country.
Yeah, where is this is so bad that I don't know. I live in Pennsylvania. I don't know where Shippensburg is. Where is Shippensburg?
It's more central.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then we'd be the only one in this area that would have that.
Penn State would be the closest one.
And that's not very close at all.
It is not. West Virginia's accredited. Ohio State's accredited. But it's a very small, very prestigious club. The process takes 5 years, maybe 6 years.
Oh, wow.
So we're going to be working this year to clean up some of the paperwork, some of the requirements to make sure we're in compliance. And then sometime in the next year, we're going to bring in an outside person to take a look and say, what is the path you need to follow to become an accredited communication program? We feel our program is in good shape. We had an outside program reviewer last year for multimedia, and her name's Dr. Jennifer Greer, and her message to me was, this is a really strong program, and your program is serving students well.
Yeah, I absolutely think it is. And I didn't, to be fair, I didn't stay at UView for very long because I just had other things that I was interested in working on. But I have friends that go and they have a good time down there, and it seems like it's been a good experience for a lot of people.
Yeah, it is. In Media and Society, the class you both had me for.
Yep.
Yesterday, it seems like it was last week, but yesterday we had 3 student media organizations come to class. Next week we'll have 4 or 5 more. So it is always my goal to get first-year students as plugged in, because if you join UView or Point Park Athletics or the Globe or WPPJ and you find something that you feel strongly about that you enjoy, I think we have a great opportunity to keep you on campus, that you have found your place, you have your friends, you have a good situation. I think the kids who end up transferring are kids who didn't find that space. So we work very, very hard to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I guess for all of like I've always told people, for all of my, I guess, complaints about Point Park, although there aren't too many, the one thing I've always said is that if I hadn't picked this school, I wouldn't have any of the stuff that I have now. I probably wouldn't have found the Bridge USA chapter. I probably wouldn't be doing this because I wouldn't have met him. And like Gavin's, a lot of the reason why I have done a lot of the stuff that I've done is that he's helped me with a lot of it. So, and that's like, I wouldn't have all that stuff. I wouldn't have the network that I have if I wouldn't have picked this school. And I have to give it some credit for that.
The great thing for me is in Media and Society, you often make friends.
Yeah.
You find people in class who have shared interests, who you enjoy being around. And then you find kind of your path at Point Park. And to watch both of you have my class when I think you were 18 years old, and now to see you at 20 years old is a huge. The growth that I've seen from both of you in the last couple of years is just really, really impressive. So I'm glad I get to, as Dean, just stand there and cheer you on sometimes.
I appreciate that. And I never really thought of that, but I guess that's one of like the rewarding parts of your job is you get to see students go from being a freshman that doesn't know anyone here and then leave with a successful prospects of a career.
I actually meet an awful lot of kids even earlier.
Yeah.
When kids come to Point Park, I meet with about 150 kids and families per year. So I'll often meet them as sophomores, juniors, or seniors in high school. And to see them go from a kid who is in high school, maybe struggling to grow up a little bit, to
Yep.
find a place, and then come to Point Park, and then all of a sudden you see a podcast, a broadcast, or you hear a WPPJ, or you see the students' work in the Globe. It is absolutely one of the most rewarding parts of my job. And then the last part is after graduation, when a kid emails me. So I've had former students work for the Las Vegas Raiders and Denver Broncos and San Diego Chargers. For a kid to text me, I got the Raider job.
Yeah.
That's the most amazing text in the world.
Yeah, that's great. That is really cool. And that's the one thing I think that I didn't realize is how big Point Park's network is for being such a small school, for being next to, and I'm sure that obviously Pitt has a huge network as well, but there feels like there's something about Point Park's it's really big and it's also really small at the same time.
I encourage every student to have a LinkedIn account when you get here.
Yep.
And to connect with every Point Park alum. So if you're a broadcasting student, connect with Greg Brown of the Pirates and Bob Pompiani at KDKA. I tell people probably half the broadcast professionals in Pittsburgh are Point Park alumni. So that says an awful lot about our students, but it also says an awful lot about our programs. So you should absolutely take advantage of the fact that we have so many well-respected, esteemed alumni.
Yeah, I agree. Well, while we're on this, any other School of Communications stuff that we should know about?
Yeah, we're going to be putting together an advisory board. It's going to meet this fall, and advisory boards generally have about 35 or 40 people, and they are some of your most successful alumni. So I'll reach out to our alums in sports and broadcasting and PR ads, social media. And when the advisory board comes and meets at Point Park, it has a few goals. One of those goals is to look at our program and say, as an alum, what do you like? What do you dislike? So take a hard look at our curriculum. The advisory board will also look at our technology. Is our podcasting space adequate? Do we need more TV studio space? Do we need cameras? What are the needs of the Globe? So they take a hard look at technology. They take a hard look at student media. And then the last goal for an advisory board is to help me raise some money. So maybe we have a new podcasting scholarship that we can try and raise money for. So I'm really, really excited that we'll be naming an advisory board and that it'll be meeting on campus. And I hope our students come out and meet some of them during the first meeting because it could really, really help their career prospects.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, is that open to students? Because I would go.
We'll have a reception for the advisory board where students can participate. So we want you to have some one-on-one time with advisory board members because sometimes you may feel uncomfortable bringing an issue to me. I don't think that's the case. I try to be approachable.
I think you do a good job at that, yeah.
But maybe a student doesn't feel comfortable saying, hey, I don't like this class always meets in an afternoon. I work. Can we work something out? So we want students to have access to advisory board members so they can say, hey, this is what I would like to see changed. So we can be proactive, that we listen. Our program, since I've become dean, we've updated every single undergraduate academic program. I will match our programs up with anybody. Last year, we added broadcasting, sports media, and documentary as a new graduate program.
Really? That's cool.
We updated public relations, advertising, and social media at the graduate level. So our programs are really, really strong, and I feel they are as good as any large state school.
Yeah, I mean, I can see it for sure with all the. It seems like we see a lot of that stuff, a lot of that. Do you get a sense that the students appreciative, like coming up to you, thanking you for stuff? Like, do you got students that kind of stop you on the street? I know that I do. I always try to stop and say hi to you on the street. Do you get that a lot?
I try to talk to students as much as I can. I tell my family a dean's job is 24 hours a day.
Yep.
And once a week, I'll get a call in an evening, or I'll get a text in an evening, and it'll be something pretty serious. I was in a car accident. I'm going to be admitted to Pitt. Can you let my faculty know so I don't fall behind? I put together a student advisory board. Love to have both of you on it, where I meet with students once a month, and it's your opportunity to talk one-on-one, and it's a space that whatever you tell me stays there. If you tell me I don't like Dr. Jones, I don't think Dr. Jones does advising very well, doesn't seem prepared in classes, whatever that issue is, it's a chance for me to hear from you, and it's a chance for you to be heard. Because I think when students get unhappy is when they have issues or concerns with a program, but nobody's listening to them.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And you mentioned that to me before, the student advisory board thing, and I definitely would be interested in joining that to a certain extent. I will say, I don't. You said it's once a month.
It's once a month, and
Okay.
I feed you pizza.
That's pretty low. I think with my schedule, I could probably make that work. Do you know what day it's happening?
It's usually Friday around 11 or noon. So,
Dang. That's right when we're doing this.
but we
Oh
can
no,
we
make
can look
something
at
work.
time.
Yeah, we'll make something work. We could always. Oh, I booked this for the rest of the semester. Oops. Okay, we'll maybe work that out. I would be interested in doing that though.
Yeah.
I think that's good too. Is that, and I don't know if that happens at bigger universities, but the thing I've always respected about you is you've always seemed very willing and very eager to meet with students and listen to their concerns. And I do think that that a lot of people see that. Like when I mention that you're coming on the show, people always get excited.
Yeah, if you're going to be a dean, you need to realize you're here to serve students. And I view students and offering them the strongest education possible as my goal. And I work very, very hard and think about it all the time. And what can I do to help them out? And it'll vary sometimes with students. Sometimes you'll have a student who just went to a small high school, who didn't get broadcast production experience, and is a little anxious to go work for UView. So you have to build that student up. For other kids, the issue might be, I need a part-time job. And since I've come to Point Park, I've had kids come to tell me, hey, there was a change in family situation. My mother's hours were cut, my father's hours were cut, and he leads on a part-time job. So I try to support students as much as possible, and I try to be a person that they know they can come to and have a conversation where they can speak honestly, and they know they walk away that I listen to them.
Yeah. I think that's really important. I think that's especially important at a small school. And I do, like I said, I've always appreciated that about the stuff you've done.
You come to Point Park because you get small class sizes and
Yep.
individual attention.
That's exactly why I picked it.
If you wanted to go to that large state school where your history class has 400 kids in it and the professor's giving a PowerPoint presentation and a graduate student is grading the papers, and if you email the professor has no clue who you are,
Yeah.
then that's great. If that's where
Yeah.
you feel you should be, and I've met kids like that before. But if you want to come to a place where your first class might have 24 kids, after that, most classes are going to have 10, 15, maybe 20. You're going to get to know other kids. You're going to get to know faculty. You're going to be part of a community. I think that is the type of program I feel most comfortable. And something I don't think we talked about last time is a School of Communication. every single month tries to have an event for students.
Yep.
And the idea behind that is we want first-year students meeting sophomores, juniors, and seniors.
Yep.
I want broadcast kids meeting PR, ads, social media, and photography. And we had a lot of fun last year. We did a Pittsburgh ghost tour. We had bingo night. We had elf movie night. We even had dodgeball.
I've still never been to dodgeball, and the first one of this year happened when I had work. But I am gonna make it. I'm gonna put it. I've never actually written it down. I'm gonna write it down that I'm gonna go to dodgeball.
Dodgeball's a lot of fun. You get to see me, an old person out there doing my best to fire dodgeballs at you. And I think the School of Comm kids who've come have had a great, great time. And it's really, when I see photography kids all of a sudden talking to broadcast kids and transfer kids talking to seniors and first-year kids talking to juniors, all of a sudden you see friendships building that wouldn't happen. So I think that's helped the School of Comm.
Yeah, and a lot of networking happens too. And I'll say, and I know I talked about it previously before, but like that's the one great thing about esports is that we've got photography guys, PR and advertising guys, we've got broadcast production, we've got sports communications, like we've got a little mix of everyone. We've got COPA majors in there. We've got a theater production. I think he's theater production. Yeah, we have a theater production guy in there too. Got a little bit of everybody.
I think the clubs and groups and student media at Point Park are really special, and they're such a strong form of community. So
yeah, and speaking of that, this is something I wanted to talk to you about because I wasn't here before COVID. From what I've heard, because I have run into a bit of struggles running a club, like getting attendance and getting retention, and I know that last year a lot of clubs reported the same issues. I've heard that it wasn't necessarily like that before COVID, that there was maybe a little more of a lively social atmosphere. Do you think there's any way for us to get back to that?
I hope so. So my experience at Point Park has only been COVID because I accepted the job early January of 2020, and I took the job and started my first day June 1st, 2020. So that was right in the middle of COVID as we had mask orders and we had schools being shut down and colleges gone remote. So unfortunately, I didn't get to see Point Park community and campus life before COVID. But having a high school student, having a college student, it's sad to see the effect it had on them.
Yeah.
That you couldn't do things with high school. Wrestling season was affected for Luke.
Yep.
For Dominic, he transferred to W&J when I took the job, and all his classes were online, so he didn't get to know kids. So I think the 2 years of COVID hurt high school and college kids a great deal.
Yeah.
I think one of the ways they were hurt was student life, connections, activities, groups, the things that you reminisce about after college were hurt. So I've seen slow progress. Like last year I thought was better than the prior year. And I think this year is going to be better, but I think it'll still take a little while for every college to get back to where it was in 2018.
Yeah, it's going to take a while to work ourselves out of that, I think. Yeah, I'm worried that, and I can fortunately say that I don't think my experience was damaged too badly because I went to a pretty small high school to begin with. So I didn't have any of that broadcast production experience, really anything like that when I was in high school. But I don't think my experience was damaged too badly. But I do worry about the fact that I don't think that we're going to see the full damage of what COVID did. Like, we might be seeing it for a while.
Yeah, my son Luke, so when at the time we were in Alabama, we were at Mountain Brook High School, one of the best high schools in Alabama. When it went remote, I mean, he turned his computer screen off and he was sleeping in his room. And I'm giving Luke a hard time, but I suspect an awful lot of kids did that.
Of course I did.
So,
Yeah.
so you had a lot of kids who are like, "This isn't what I signed up for.
Yeah.
This isn't fun."
No, it
Um,
wasn't.
and I'm missing my friends,
Yep.
and I'm missing being part of something bigger. So it's going to take a little while to get that back. But there's no question when you largely punt on what traditional junior high, high school, or college was for 2 years, there's no question that there are going to be some effects from that.
Yeah. I would say I definitely did that. I definitely slept through a couple of classes and just snoozed the alarm and didn't go a couple of times. I tried not to do that, but it was tough. And it was even tough. I remember when we went back, like we had quarantine and we were remote, and then was it? I think it was right around the beginning of my senior year. My high school went back in session. I think for the full, no, not for the full year. I think it was just for a little bit in the beginning that we went back, and then we were remote again. And then I think toward the end. God, how do I not remember that? It was 3 years ago, and I don't even. Maybe my brain just blocked out all the just the parts that sucked. But yeah, even in that just little bit, I remember. Even when we were back after that, it was tough to go from being online, where to be honest, I didn't try as much as I probably should have. Yeah. Going back to in person, having to like reapply that and everything, and then we went online again, and it was just that part was not fun at all. I do not want to go back to that.
You had masking, you had social distancing.
Yep.
It was not what you had grown up with as this is high school.
Yeah, definitely not. Like freshman and sophomore. I remember when we first, and this is maybe a little bit of just like a topic jump, but I remember when we first heard about what COVID was, there was that mentality of like, yeah, but it'll never get here. Mm-hmm. It won't affect us. And then whenever it slowly started to affect us, they were thinking, okay, however X number of months or years for a vaccine. And I was thinking like, what? Like, of course, in this instant gratification, we get everything immediately. And I'm thinking 2 years for a vaccine, like, that's crazy. And luckily it wasn't 2 years, but I just remember thinking like it didn't feel real until it was real, until it was right there. And we had to stay home for 2 weeks, which then turned into many months. But yeah, it was just a weird time. The 2020s are going to be, I'm not excited, but I'm interested to look at my kids' history book and see how we decide to tell the story of the 2020s.
Yeah, there are profound changes. World War I, World War II, Great Depression.
And the Cold War, too. I mean, the 20th century was a crazy time to live through.
It was a hot mess, and COVID will be a period that people are going to look back on and say that was really, really tough. I'm not sure how. I'm not sure why certain decisions were made. I'm not sure that we served kids well with the decisions we made. It's always easy to look back later and say, I made a mistake. If only we had done this. But I look forward to reading the history books about COVID, and I'm glad we're finally moving to a point where new strain this fall, but everybody's taking a deep breath. Yeah. And everybody's saying, okay, we're probably going to have a high school student. We're probably going to have a college student with COVID, and we're going to handle it in a responsible way. Yep. We're not going to shut down the whole school. We're not going to go remote.
Yeah, it just happened to esports. It got us over there. And again, it's like it's been, because I've had it twice now. The first time was, it was about the same both times. It was a bad cold for 2 or 3 days, and then I was fine. And but it had sort of like escaped my mind. Just I hadn't heard about it. No one was getting it, and then all of a sudden in the group chat got COVID, and then 2 other people, and luckily didn't spread. I didn't get it it didn't spread too wide, but yeah, I do hope that you're right. I hope that there's just a little bit of a different approach on how we cope with that.
Yeah, I ended up catching COVID twice myself. I'm not sure how I caught it the first time. It was fall of 2020, and campus was barren, and I drive to work by myself, but I had a couple symptoms. My doctor insisted on a test. I took it, and I did have COVID. It really, really mild. The only thing that happened as a result was I lost some of my sense of taste. And then last fall, at the beginning of the semester, again caught COVID, but this time I just slept for like 3 days.
Yeah, that's mainly
It
what I
was
did
just,
last time.
Yeah, it was just, I was really, really tired, and for 3 or 4 days just slept like you can't imagine. Then I started to feel better and came back. But I think right now, Point Park relies on medical experts. I think Dean Keith Palo, overseeing our health center, really, really well done. I'm grateful for everyone's leadership. But it seems in fall of 23, the idea is a little more, okay, you have COVID, you're going to isolate now,
Yep.
and less of everybody you possibly could have come in contact with, we need to reach out to, we need to test, and things like that.
Yeah, it's maybe more of an isolated
Yeah.
approach instead of just everyone. Yeah, that's another thing too, is like the first time, it's funny, I know exactly how I got it the first time, not so sure about the second time. I've told this story before. And I've said, like, you know, I don't mean to downplay COVID. I have parents that worked in the medical industry. I know how truly, like, tough it was. But, you know, it's just one of those things where it was freshman year. We were just talking a little bit of smack, like, oh, COVID can't get us. And it was our friend group all hanging out in one of the dorms. And the next day, we all had it. And then we all tested positive the next day. But the second time, it was actually the first week of classes last spring. Very first. So I didn't even get to go to my first week of classes, I remember. But I don't know how I got it that time. But yeah, it was just, it's weird. I feel like and actually maybe not even just the 2020s, but I feel like 2015 to 2025, that's going to be a weird decade to look at in the history books.
Yeah, I think you're right. The last 8 years have just been one challenge.
It's weird.
Issues that you never ever, like with COVID, people weren't, a high school student wasn't thinking, geez, there's going to be this new virus that's going to affect people. It's going to travel throughout the world. And people who have health conditions, older people, are at high risk for it. And to protect those people, society's going to change profoundly.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things where I think everybody likes to think about, okay, where am I going to be in 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year? That's not something that anybody had on their radar. And it was also something where you weren't sure what the end was going to be.
Yeah.
Is this masking going to last forever? Is this now how school's going to be?
Yeah.
Are we going to have to stay remote until there's a vaccine? So very, very hard time with the uncertainty. And I think the social, psychological effects on students were profound.
Yeah. And just another thing too is like, this is funny that I was going to say not to get too political on a show called Not Just Politics. That's pretty funny. But also, like, I've just been thinking about recently, like, growing up, and again, I've always said this, and I don't think I have to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I'm not disparaging anyone for their political views. I've never done that. But growing up in the Trump era was it's just the strangest. It's a weird time. It's really weird.
Yeah. President Trump was a unusual candidate, and I try to make it very hard. The kids who have me in the class can't guess my politics. I try to challenge you.
I never knew.
Regardless, and the great thing is if someone says you're a Republican, I would say you're wrong. If they say you're a Democrat, I would say you're wrong because I'm actually unaffiliated as a voter. The Trump era was different. Trump was not a traditional political candidate, which excited his base, excited some people in society that we're going to have a business person as the president and the government's going to function like that. And one of the things, though, is government is different from a business.
Yes.
And there's not a profit margin you have to maintain to stay in business. Government has a different role to protect people, to keep people safe from communicable diseases, to make sure you get Social Security. So sometimes non-traditional candidates who didn't start by running for governor of Pennsylvania and then becoming a senator and then pursuing the presidency may not have the same background of someone who did follow that path. So I think President Trump's candidacy for people who really, really wanted a non-traditional candidate, they embraced it.
Yeah.
I think another thing is his use of social media, especially Twitter at the time. All of a sudden, you had a presidential candidate who was using Twitter to attack political opponents.
Yeah.
And that's not something that had happened historically. If you think back to when President Nixon was president, President Nixon often didn't attack his opponents.
Yeah.
President Nixon used Vice President Spiro Agnew to do that. I'm going to criticize journalists. I'm going to criticize the media. I'm going to criticize Democrats. So prior presidents often used allies to attack political opponents. Trump was using social media, which was very, very different.
Yeah.
And you had a candidate who brought in media attention. We talked in Media Society about how CNN's ratings went through the roof when at the time, candidate Trump was part of the debate.
Yep.
People tuned in just to watch him. Whether you liked him, whether you hated him, you tuned in. If you looked at newspaper readership, it went up significantly for the Washington Post and New York Times when Trump was in office, and now it's falling again. If you look at CNN, people watching it, same thing happened. So Trump brought changes to social media and media, but one of the things that people tend to forget is this. CNN made a lot of money when President Trump was in office because people tuned in to say why he was a horrible person and a horrible president.
Yeah, and now I don't know what it's currently now, but it's like I remember after he left office, the ratings went through the floor.
Yeah.
And I think Fox News went through the floor as well. And like Tucker Carlson was still getting pretty decent numbers, but now that he's gone too, it's like I don't even know what they're doing. And I don't watch any of them, but I don't know what they're doing at this point. It's just really, it's weird. Like I was thinking and I'm sure that like growing up, I'm sure growing up in the 20th century was crazy too. Like if you were born in, I saw a post one time, I forget who put it up, but it was a thing that if you were born in the year 1900 and you lived to be 80, you could have fought in the First World War. You lived through the Great Depression, the Second World War, the Cold War, Vietnam, a little bit of Korea. And then you saw and this is like, it's so much, there's so much stuff going on in that time.
Yeah, the Trump era is interesting. I haven't read books about it. One of the things that I'm almost embarrassed to say I gave up when I became dean is reading books, just because it seems like I email 24 hours a day or I text 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
And I was a journalist who worked in Washington, D.C. for almost 5 years, got to cover the White House one time, got to cover Congress. So I loved politics and I loved covering political stories, but I haven't had a chance to read any of the books about the Trump presidency, Bob Woodward type books. And at some point I need to make that a priority because I think you're right. It's a really fascinating time.
I read a book from Tim Miller. It was called Why We Did It. And it was good, but I was working landscaping over the summer, so I did an audiobook, and I know and there's a thing where if I listen to an audiobook, I in some ways need the author to read it, especially if I know what that author's voice sounds like. So I was thinking, I know this guy isn't Tim Miller. Like, why isn't Tim Miller reading the book? But that was the thing. But yeah, I only read one. And there's another thing too, is like it's weird growing up. I have a friend that's been on the show a couple of times, Claire Ashcraft, that wrote an opinion piece for All Sides, which is a company that I internship with. She works there now. They're all into like media bias, getting people out of their political bubbles, that kind of thing. It was really interesting. She said, I'm paraphrasing, but it was like, when I'm asked about what it was like growing up in the Trump era, I'll say that it was a time when we judged each other, not for the character that we knew we had, but whether or not we supported someone that we ultimately would never know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Interesting books are being written. I feel, I need to do a better job of staying up with them because I'll read newspapers and magazines and I'll read the summary of the books. But boy, I feel I've shortchanged myself and probably hurt myself as an instructor by not being prepared to talk about these things in class. I think topics like bias are hard. And one of the things that journalists struggle with is this. If you look at voter registration for journalists, it's pretty high Democratic.
Yeah, very high.
And one of the things that people argue is, yes, I may be a registered Democrat, but I don't think it affects my news coverage. And I'm hesitant to expect, because I think when you have strongly held beliefs, it's pretty hard not to allow them to affect your journalism sometimes. Yep. And I go to all the top political sites, and there are times when I see headlines where clearly a journalist is offering an opinion. The person's not just being an umpire calling balls and strikes.
Yep.
You clearly can tell what that person's leanings are. And a couple other things related to that. I don't think the public is buying the argument that journalists are unbiased.
Oh, I don't think so.
And I think it's complicated. I don't think most journalists are out there overtly trying to push an agenda, but I think it's more complicated. And journalists need to take a hard look at how the public views them.
Yeah.
Your audience needs to like you, needs to support you, needs to respect you. And right now, journalists in some public opinion surveys are ranking close to trash collector. That's how prestigious they view the job. And that's in no way to criticize or make fun of trash collectors, but journalists have very, very low public approval.
Yeah, we need the trash collectors, but it's not a flashy job. And I think that's what you're maybe trying to say about the journalism thing.
That a lot of people don't aspire to be trash collectors, even though it's a critical role in cities, in society. And that journalists, if they don't view it as important, if they don't respect them, it says a lot about why people aren't reading newspapers, magazines, going online, watching news broadcasts.
Yeah, I forget who has the quote, but it's the idea that someone points out the window and they say, see that building over there? That's the fourth wing of government, and it's the press. And they're supposed to keep us in line. They're supposed to be honest. And I wonder if that's where a lot of the social mistrust is coming from. I think a lot of it is coming from, it's coming from a lot of places, but I do think that I'm not afraid to admit that I don't trust CNN and Fox. I don't trust MSNBC. I don't trust them to give me the entire truth or even any of the truth in some situations.
It doesn't help, in my opinion, when CNN and MSNBC and Fox have opinion shows.
Yeah.
Because people don't draw a clear distinction between this is journalism and this is opinion. I think one of the things that I find unfortunate is, and I had an editor from a local newspaper talk to me about this, is the dislike that people might feel for Fox or MSNBC or CNN is now filtering down to local newspapers. That when that person is covering high school sports, people are insulting the journalist, or when they're covering a school board meeting, they're insulting the journalist. So I don't think people always draw the distinction I would like between someone who's an opinion commentator on MSNBC and somebody who's working for the Latrobe Bulletin.
Yeah, I'm sure that Fox has plenty of reporters that are just covering local news that are doing a good job and that are honestly trying to do that. It's just tough, though, it's especially tough whenever people like Tucker Carlson, Rachel Maddow, or Brian Stelter become like the faces of these companies. Like when I think of Fox, I think of what is his name, like Jesse Waters or Jesse Walters, and like Tucker Carlson. Like it's not good maybe to think of those people first because they're in the opinion business. Like they're in the culture war business. That's how they're making their money.
Yeah, they are not journalists, but the public doesn't realize that.
No, and they don't. And you're right, they don't do a good job of advertising it. It's like the newspaper is like it's a piece of paper. It has an opinion section, but on Fox News they don't have a little graphic in the top corner that says this is the opinion section of Fox. That would be a whole different story. And I don't know if just that little distinction changes anything, but it wouldn't.
They do have one that pops up.
Oh, really?
They have to have.
Oh, that just goes to show you how little I watch Fox News because I had no idea that they did that.
It's like really discreet. Like it's just there briefly and then it like disappears.
Oh, I'm saying like if it stayed there. You're saying it goes away.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's not great.
So the public, I think right now, journalists need to make the case for why it's an important profession. It happened after Watergate, where kids flooded to journalism schools.
Yeah.
And there were jobs at newspapers and magazines, radio stations and TV stations. But you've also had the collapse of the business model. So advertisers don't go to the Latrobe Bulletin anymore as they once did. So staffs get smaller, stories are covered less. An awful lot of coverage is based on a press release and not enterprise reporting. And people look at that product and say, is it worth my time? Is it worth my money? And in a lot of cases, they're saying, no, I don't think it is.
Do you think, we talked about like the future of media. Do you think that's something, because like what we're doing here is long form. Like we're not releasing anything really under an hour. And it's funny, we interviewed someone that was running for public office in Plum and Oakmont recently. And he was like, but people that I follow on social media loved the episode, but they were like, man, it's really long. You know, it was what was that one? 2.5 hours or something like that. That one was long. Do you think that eventually linear TV is going to slowly die out and that companies are going to have to start maybe transitioning over to something a little more long form?
I wish I could answer what was going to happen. And I think a lot of investors, I think a lot of media professionals, because right now what you're seeing is the collapse of regional sports networks.
Yeah.
That in markets like Pittsburgh, AT&T Sports is no longer viable. Why? They were paying professional teams, the Pirates, the Penguins, a lot of money to broadcast. Well, as people give up cable, as they give up satellite, the fees go up, the audience goes down, and you no longer have a viable business. So I think 10 or 12 of those regional sports, including Pittsburgh, are in the process of overhauling. Some of them closed down. But as more people stream and fewer people watch cable and satellite and even local stations, what's left? And it's going to be hard. It's going to be very, very hard, because if you survey college students, do they have a streaming service? Probably more than one. Are they watching local news? They're not. Are they watching local sports? They try to, but how do you do it if you don't use a cable satellite model?
Yeah.
So we're over the next 5 or 10 years, I have no idea what's going to happen. I think what's probably going to be the most likely situation is the Pirates, the Penguins, the Steelers start streaming, and instead of buying a whole NFL package, maybe you buy the Pittsburgh Steelers rights and you stream it and you get to watch your game.
Yeah, I wonder. That's true. I wonder, like, do you think they would ever? Because to me, YouTube seems like a place where you could put your content, still get ad revenue money, you still get viewership money, and then you can still live stream it, and then people can get access to. And again, they might not want to give too much of that away because in some ways, I think you pay for. Oh gosh, this is how little I've used cable TV in my life. But like, there's a way where you can like record and then go back and watch old games, and you can look at like the archives. So maybe, because I'm seeing like, I don't know if this is currently still happening, but I know for a while the streaming services have been going through some trouble too. Netflix been losing money, and I think just because the market got so oversaturated. So I'm wondering maybe if YouTube is, because I don't see YouTube going anywhere. Like I really don't. Like YouTube is such a behemoth. Maybe YouTube is the place where these people start to go for sports.
Maybe. I think the business model of the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s works very poorly. Doesn't work for newspapers, doesn't work for advertisers, doesn't work for magazines. And smart business models, if you look at the magazine industry, the magazines that have thrived have said, we're going to distance ourselves from just making money from circulation. We're going to distance ourselves from just making money from advertising. We're going to have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 revenue streams. And those magazines have done okay. For cable and satellite, though, I wouldn't invest much money on it right now because I don't think it has a great future. I think local TV stations will survive. There have been some cuts, but there are still jobs at KDKA, WTAE. So I think that'll happen. But I think what you're probably going to see is an awful lot of businesses and high schools and nonprofits end up doing broadcasting themselves and kind of skipping the role of the local TV station. Eliminating the role of the cable satellite. You see ESPN. ESPN was always the go-to place if you wanted to advertise to reach young males. Okay? Not that way today. You see ESPN viewership going down, and you see the on-air talent being cut very deeply.
Yeah, that's a weird thing to think about. I guess where do you go now? I mean, I guess I'm still a young man. I don't know where you go to advertise to me. Probably YouTube. YouTube is probably the place to go.
I think social media is the way to go. And I think what the ad model is looking like.
That you or me. I think that was me.
I think looking at social media influencers, guerrilla marketing, sponsorships, I think an awful lot of that money is going to go into traditional public relations, advertising, social media platforms, and I think less is going to go into this was the newspaper, this was the magazine, this was the radio or TV station.
And in your class in media and society, if I'm remembering it correctly, you talk about media fragmentation, which is like, in a way, that is sort of the democratization of media, like more people having access. Like there's more options to go to now. Like if I want to get my news, the last place I'm going to go to is turning on the TV. I'd say the first place I'm going to go to are like Substack is a place that I'm going to go to for journalists. YouTube is the place I'm going to go to for documentaries and a lot of like talk shows too. I wonder if that's actually, because it seemed like a good thing at first. Like people being able to get news that didn't have a narrative necessarily, get that maybe more of an organic source. But maybe do you think it ever backfires? Like is there a point where there's too much fragmentation?
Yeah, media fragmentation is a fascinating concept because If you look back to the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, in the mid 1960s, 95% of people were watching one of three networks: ABC, CBS, NBC. So they had very, very limited access to broadcasting. And on radio, depending on where you live, maybe have 5, 6 radio stations close to you that you could listen to that you viewed as an option. Then you had a daily newspaper, and you might subscribe to a few magazines. And when we talk about War of the Worlds, one of the reasons, in my opinion, that War of the Worlds produced media effects was because people who listened to the radio broadcasts didn't have other ways to check it. They didn't have TV. They didn't have websites to go to where they could have immediately found out. So the 1960s, when you have 3 networks, everybody's watching the same shows. Now, were there some advantages to it? Absolutely. When you would watch a show, you would go to school and you would talk about it with your friends. 1970s show, if you were a teenager, was The $6 Million Man. Steve Austin was the Bionic Man, and he did things like fighting Bigfoot. And you would then go to school and pretend you were Steve Austin or Bigfoot with your friends. But it was content that everybody knew because they were watching it because they had limited options. Flash forward to the 1980s, and all of a sudden, cable's diffusing. And instead of having 3 options, you have 10, 15. So it starts to diffuse. And teenagers love that because you started to get some very highly specialized content. Things like MTV, where I can listen to music, I can watch videos, I can see music stars perform, and it was very, very popular. So teenagers loved as media fragmentation occurred because they were tired of watching Gilligan's Island and 60 Minutes and shows that were aimed at their parents. So as you get in the 80s and 90s, you go from 3 networks to cable systems of 40, 100, then 200. Dramatic fragmentation where the viewership for the major networks declined. Now, there are both positive and negatives to it. The negative is the sense of community from watching the same shows had gone away. You could go to school and talk about a TV show and no one in your class had watched it. No one had even heard of it. So a form of community was lost. At the same time, you were more likely to find niche programming, shows that you really liked, that you enjoyed. If you like to cook, here's your show. If you like to do home repairs, here's your show. If you like to golf, here's your show. So it was much more responsive to the audience's needs. It was more democratic. All of a sudden, you had more voices being part of the media discussion. So there were some good things. But does there come a point at which fragmentation becomes so significant that nobody has a shared experience? And I worry about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's true. I didn't think about the shared experience thing. I guess also maybe that's what we're seeing. Maybe that's why, because eventually you have too many options and they can't all survive. So eventually it's going to be cut down to, like, maybe we're going to find what our capacity is as a society, because there were 3 and now there's thousands of channels and on YouTube and even TV that you can go watch. But they're not all going to survive.
They aren't going to survive. They aren't all financially viable. In 2023, here's how most families operate. The 1950s, where you got together, your family sat in front of the TV and you all watched shows together, is gone. When my family was all together over this summer, my oldest boy, Dominic, was in his rooms playing video games. My youngest boy, Luke, was in his bedroom watching football. My wife might be in a different room watching HGTV, and I might be in a different room watching classic TV shows. So you have a whole family that's in the house together in different rooms watching very different shows. So the experiences aren't even the same in one family, let alone in your peer group.
Dang, my family's out of place then, because they're all watching Suits right now, and I haven't.
Nice.
Apparently, that show's great. I haven't watched it, but yeah, my parents are watching Suits. When my brother and I were home, I would actually be the one that left because I wasn't interested in watching. I don't do TV shows; it's too much of a commitment. He's been bugging me. He's like, "You got to watch Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul," and one day, I will do it, but not today. So many episodes. And The Sopranos. So there's so many TV shows. But the one thing we all do watch together is disc golf. We're a big disc golf family, and that's a really big growing sport, and the content on YouTube is getting really, really good. So that's the one thing we actually do all still watch together when we're all home.
In Media and Society, I remember one of the assignments in there is you create your own idea for a magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And the first time someone suggested a disc golf magazine, highly specialized niche magazine, was probably 15, 16 years ago.
I was thinking, because I didn't do that for my magazine.
But-
wow, that's a long time ago. That's back when the sport was just a baby.
Yeah, it was just starting, and people said this has a lot of potential. It's a lot of fun. It's going to grow. So you had people go out, and my students presented a magazine. I said, wow, that's really, really neat. Those niche magazines of 15 years ago, though, now are viable YouTube channels where someone puts together, this is what you need to know about disc golf, and they make a little money. So it's one of the kind of real interesting changes where maybe a 20-year-old Point Park student 15 years ago would have read a magazine on disc golf. In 2023, they have their own podcast. They have their own YouTube channel to talk about it.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's I don't know why I didn't do that. I mean, I should have done a disc golf magazine because now it's huge. There's players getting millions of dollars a year now to play.
It'll be the magazine assignment will be coming up in about 3 weeks, so I can't wait to see if someone chooses it as a topic again this year.
You said you had a couple people in one of your classes say they like to do it because when I first got here, I didn't know anyone that liked to, but now I'm seeing it. Like more and more people are starting to get in. It's so fun. I told Angelo that I was going to take him disc golfing because he was like, I want to go. I got to figure out when we're going to do that. Maybe we'll figure that out next week when he comes on. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. And I think going back to COVID was the best thing that ever happened to the sport of disc golf because it was socially distanced. It's all outside. It's very little money to get in to like buy discs, and you can just go.
Yeah, it's different. My son being a wrestler, it was hard because kids are wearing masks, the officials wearing a mask, parents are wearing a mask, and wrestling as a contact sport doesn't really work well with masks, as does football. So people began to take a hard look at what are those sports where you are distanced, where it's not contact. So I do think one of the things that came out of COVID was more people said, you know what, this is a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm sure ball golf had a big boost. I imagine a boost in viewership as well. Yeah, I wonder if that's where pickleball, because pickleball is really popular now. And I had heard of pickleball before, but I wonder if that was a similar situation where COVID gave it a bit of a boost.
It might have. I haven't played. I've watched a little bit. I've read about it, but maybe I'll put that on the summer 2024 agenda.
That might be. Got to go play some. It looks fun. The professional stuff looks crazy because I was in Angelo's sports podcasting class last semester, and he was like, "What sports are people into?" And the one kid was like, "I love professional pickleball." So we pulled up a highlight reel, and it's a crazy sport. It's nuts.
I'll have to check out a YouTube video of that.
To go check out highlights of pickleball.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And that was another thing I think is like, yeah, COVID took away a lot of stuff. We're going back to COVID, I guess. We're here. It took away a lot of stuff, but I guess it also did give us a lot of new. Like I wonder what this world would be like if we didn't have it. Like, would Trump have won in 2020? Would any of this, like, I wonder how different it would look.
Yeah. I wish COVID never did happen.
Yeah, of course.
Had so many. My mother, in fact, died of COVID.
Sorry.
And had friends who became very, very ill. Had some family members suffer great losses So, boy, I wish COVID never had happened. That being said, it is nice to see that our definition of community, what we do in our leisure time, survived, changed, evolved.
Yep.
And so I do think, I always like to think, okay, that was a very bad thing. What are the good things that developed from it?
Yeah.
So I do think some good things did develop, and I am sure it affected presidential race, governor's races,
Yep.
local races where you had people who felt we need a mask, COVID's a public health emergency, and these are the recommendations, versus that person maybe working manual labor whose job was threatened, who said, I need to go back to work.
Yep.
So unbelievable societal upheaval. And you had families that would argue and disagree, and in some cases just distance themselves because of relatives holding different political opinions.
Yeah, that's going back to that thing, like us judging each other. That weird, that sort of tribal nature. I don't think we're ever really gonna get rid of that. I think we'll always be living with that, and I think that's something that we have to. I think we have to engage with it differently. And that's the one thing speaking of, and I wanted to bring this up, but we, as usual on the show, we jumped to 10 different topics in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So I didn't get to bring it up, but that's actually the one thing, like with the nonprofit that I'm volunteering for, the Bridge USA chapter we have here in the bridge building movement, the one thing that we're having trouble doing, because you had mentioned that, like, if you look at a lot of journalists, a lot of them are going to lean politically left, the majority of them. That's actually the one thing that we're having trouble with right now, is that we're in the same situation. If you take all the people that are running a lot of the nonprofits in the movement, a lot of the people that are creating the messaging and that are running our workshops, is they're overwhelmingly left-leaning. And then we're wondering why we can't get conservatives to turn out. And I think it's because we just have a lot of blues that are, and that's not a bad thing, but I think that is a situation where, and I don't know, maybe in some ways, I wonder if COVID maybe made us realize a little bit of that, because a lot of the stuff had to go online. We couldn't get out. And that was the thing that was very heavily politicized. And yeah, I've just been thinking about that a lot. That we have to find a way to engage with people differently.
Oh, I think you absolutely need to engage with people differently. And I think it's unfortunate that too often we look at a person and the first thing we look at is not the person but the political beliefs.
Yep.
There was a advice column that I read recently that just made me laugh because I thought it was a fake letter. And that advice column was about a young lady who was very progressive, who was getting married, who didn't invite a conservative uncle to the wedding because she didn't feel safe having him there. Now, that uncle had provided financial support over the years, and had given loans, had helped the family out, had helped the young lady, I think, with maybe even a job. So the financial support was okay, but the person couldn't be at the wedding because this person is conservative, I'm progressive, all my friends are progressive. And I find things like that very, very disappointing.
Yeah.
And the advice column was saying, doesn't my uncle owe my family a wedding present even though I didn't invite him?
Nope.
And I thought, that is kind of tone deaf.
That's like a South Park episode in a way. That's like a skit from The Onion. Like, that's something that wasn't satirical. That was real.
No, it was a real advice, and I put it online, and I said, this can't be serious. And I had a bunch of people say, it absolutely is, where because you disagree with that person, you can't have that person at a wedding, at a family birthday, at a graduation party. but you still expect that person to provide financial support, which is just unbelievable. I think too often we don't understand people who are very different politically.
Amen to that.
And when you start by not understanding that person, you're never, ever going to be able to communicate with that person.
Yep.
When West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin was reelected last time, and the Biden administration had some things where they wanted him to vote for. They were inconsistent with some of his beliefs, but they also were inconsistent with West Virginia voters. And they sent Bernie Sanders to West Virginia to criticize him. Well, Bernie Sanders' popularity in West Virginia is probably about 10%. Sending someone to a deep red state to criticize them for not being progressive enough is just tone deaf. And I think people need to say, this person's conservative, but who cares? I appreciate this person because this person's progressive. Who cares? I appreciate this person because we are not just our political identities.
That's that too. That's another thing I've said on the show a couple times before, and I don't mean to like be constantly rehashing old ideas. I haven't talked to you about this, but I've said that I don't really care what a person thinks. I more care about how a person thinks and how a person approaches life. And that's more of a newer concept that some people in the bridge building space have been talking about, that I've been thinking about a lot lately, is like that we need another political axis. We need a vertical axis to go. Like you have the left, right is horizontal. We need a vertical one that measures sort of people's temperament or behavior or a mindset towards people that are different than them. Because I know plenty of progressives here that have, I think I was more conservative than I am now when I came to Point Park, and I was a little worried about that because I'd heard plenty of stories on social media about colleges not being friendly to conservative students. I've seen a little bit of that here from students. I haven't seen any of that from the administration at Point Park very often, or really at all. But what I found is that progressives here have always been very nice and very willing to engage with me. And but I know plenty that aren't, and there has to be a distinction, or at least there should be a distinction between those people. Like those people are not the same.
When we start saying we only accept people who believe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, what a huge mistake we are making, because you don't even begin to understand why that person feels differently. I have a friend who feels, you know what, I think homelessness in downtown Pittsburgh is hurting the business community. And that person feels that way as a business person, that perhaps people are saying, I'm not going to go into the city, I'm not going to go to restaurants or bars or a pirate game, because I view that as a concern. And listen to why the person feels that way. You can passionately disagree with that person, but if you start from the perspective that unless you believe 1, 2, 3, you're making life hard for yourself. And the other thing you're doing is you're limiting your circle of friends to only people who think like you, who only believe like you. And that is not what college is about. I'm disappointed from the time I went to IUP early 1980s. Colleges really were free speech zones then. The whole college, not like one little part of campus or one room. And if you wanted to argue why Donald Trump should be president again, you would go to the Oak Grove and you could offer your opinions, and some people would cheer you on and some people would say you're a fool, and you would move on. And you were 100% exposed to ideas that were very, very different. And I like to think that I grew and evolved from hearing people who had different values and backgrounds and experiences. And I think today, what I see too much college campus is if you say something that people disagree with, it's now hate speech.
Yep.
And everything's hate speech.
And how do you define that? That's the tricky part for me, is like, who gets to decide what that is? Because that's a lot of power that you probably shouldn't give to one group of people.
And the courts have been very clear that hate speech is a very, very small category of
Yes.
speech.
Yes.
Okay. Me saying that someone's a bad driver doesn't make it hate speech.
They might just
Okay.
be a. They might just
Be a bad driver. Okay. If I say someone's a bad driver, I like to think that I'm saying it because the person's a bad driver. It's not a
Yeah.
reflection of age or accessibility status
Or their character.
gender identity or character. It's
Mm-hmm.
just I was walking on the street, the person ran a red light, almost hit me, and now I'm convinced that person is not a good driver. I think, and this is true of both sides, this is not a progressive, this is not a conservative. We're way, way too likely in 2023 for people we disagree with, well, that's hate speech.
Yeah, actually, are you aware of? Do you know what FIRE is?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so they just put. I love their work. They actually have a pledge. I forget what it's called, but they have a pledge that universities sign that says they're going to rededicate themselves to the pursuit of open inquiry, free speech, that kind of stuff. For a little bit there, I was maybe considering bringing that up here, but then I just got busy and I never got around to it. But they just dropped a poll that said was it like 33% of conservative students were not wanting progressive speakers to come to campus. So it's really just it's a two-way street.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely is.
Yeah, it's so in the 1980s, all of a sudden, colleges, early 1980s, you had a traditional open forum, okay? Everybody gets the right to offer opinions.
Mm-hmm.
As you move to the late 80s, early 90s, all of a sudden colleges put in place what are called speech codes.
Mm-hmm.
And I teach media law usually every 2 or 3 years if I can fit it in.
Mm-hmm.
As you saw universities add these speech codes, they clearly were unconstitutional.
Mm-hmm.
Because for something to be constitutional, it needs to be very clear what speech you're regulating, and it needs to fit into a category such as hate speech. And you had very general statements that people could look at and say, well, I don't know what speech this limits and what it doesn't. So they were far, far too overbroad, but they're still on the books. And FIRE and other groups would then sue and go to court.
Yep.
And the college is almost always lost because in nearly every case, these speech codes went too far. I think colleges should be a place where your beliefs are challenged, and I find it unfortunate when someone says, I don't want to hear speech. I don't want to hear why someone has a different opinion.
Yeah, and I mentioned them on here before, but just for those who don't know, FIRE is the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression.
Yeah.
And they've just recently, I believe, started an initiative where they're adding, so their original work was just on college campuses. That was mainly where they started, but they're now branching out to things that are outside of college campus, which I think is going to be, I hope to be a beneficial thing. They seem to have a lot of integrity. I definitely appreciate the work that they do. Yeah, and something I was going to say, like I said before, is like, I think it's boring to have friends that only agree with you, that are only the same. Like Gavin and I certainly don't agree on everything. To be fair, Gavin and I think, agree on more than we disagree on, but there are definitely things that we don't agree on. And our group of friends is very much like that. There's a lot of difference. And what was it? The comedian Tim Dillon was like, you need people in your life that you detest. Like, because it makes it more fun that way. You don't turn into a lazy thinker like that.
I think, and there's some good sociological research to support it, especially when we're younger, we tend to gravitate people who are like us. When I was growing up, I was a huge sports fan. All my friends were huge sports fans
Yep.
in elementary and junior high and high school. So we do tend to gravitate on to friends who share at least one value with us, and it could be sports, or it could be politics, or it could be a commitment to the environment, whatever it is. I think we do tend to gravitate toward those people, but I hope people try, and this is where college is invaluable, where you have kids at Point Park who grew up in very small towns, maybe Somerset, maybe Bedford, PA. They graduated from very small towns in rural Pennsylvania, which tend to be really conservative. You're going to have classes with kids who grew up in Pittsburgh, whose parents maybe were much more progressive, who ran for office because they felt their progressive beliefs would make the community better.
Yep.
And it really, really is. You are being exposed to people from different races and ethnicities, gender identity, age, major. And boy, it's unfortunate when you don't learn from people who have different experiences.
Yeah, I would say that at this point, I'm more gravitated towards people that are different from me. Because to me, that's more interesting. Because they're from a world that I don't... I mean, everyone's from a world that I don't understand. But people that are very different from me, like that, they come from a world that I want to learn something about. Because everyone's got something to teach you.
I have always liked that when I meet someone new, I really try to find out how are they different from me, what can I learn from them.
Yeah, it's fun.
Okay. One of the things that I do very poorly is home improvements.
Yep.
Okay. When I grew up, my dad was very good in those areas. He worked maintenance at a golf course. He knew how to fix just about anything. He made the decision that my life expectancy would be much longer if I didn't try to do home repairs. I don't think he trusted me with hammers and chainsaws and any of those things.
Power tools and...
So, I am just not very good at it. When I started dating my wife, Wendy, Wendy is a contractor's daughter. So she grew up watching her dad work, learning, asking questions, and she is just very good at it. Her dad is very, very good at it. And I remember after Wendy and I got married, something happened at our first house, and I called my father-in-law, and he spent about 15 minutes trying to explain it to me. And I have no background, no experience, no work. And it was like Homer Simpson, you know. I was not comprehending anything he was saying. And after about 15 minutes, he said, just put Wendy on the phone. And he talked to her, and she had it fixed in under a minute. So for me, someone who knows how to do home improvement projects, who knows how to paint, who knows how to build a deck.
My dad's the same way. My dad's a super big like DIY guy, and he does like all sorts of stuff. And I maybe haven't done the best at always picking up on that information when I should. But yeah, and I think it's just, and you're not gonna. There's gonna be no. There's gonna be only benefit from just knowing more about everything.
Yeah, I am not a great cook either, so going over another thing. So having a friend who loves to make cakes or loves to make different foods that I would never experience. So I hope people, especially at Point Park, especially at college, challenge themselves to make friends who are different from them.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's true. And I guess like I've been trying to write more. Not very good at it. So I was like, I got to find friends that write and that can help me edit. And I'm getting a little better at it, but yeah, and it could be a little intimidating sometimes doing a home improvement project if you've never done it before. I'd be terrified.
Trying something that you've never done before.
Yep.
And challenging yourself to do it. And being willing to fail will help you throughout your career no matter what you do.
Yeah, that's a big thing is you gotta be willing to mess up a couple of times.
Things are going to go awry.
Hey, we've had that happen over here. Still happens sometimes. You just gotta roll with it.
I can think of a time Wendy decided she was going to try a new recipe.
Mm-hmm.
And it was something very different from anything she had made before. And I can remember tasting it and saying, oh my gosh, this is terrible to myself, but not saying it out loud to her as I, Dominic, and Luke ate her dinner. And later we said, could we not have that again in a nice way? But she challenged herself to make that meal, so we felt, hey, we should at least try to go along here and see.
Of course. Yeah, that still happens. And it's funny, like we kind of give my dad we give him a hard time and good fun for this, but every time he cooks, it's like he loves to just kind of improvise and just kind of go, and that's kind of what cooking is. Like, you got to just feel it sometimes. But it's funny is that he'll make something really good and we're like, please, what did you do? And he's like, I don't remember. And then the next time it's not exactly the same. It's still good, but yeah, and there's also a benefit in that, just always being willing to improvise and just kind of go with the flow a little bit, roll with the punches. Because otherwise, again, I think maybe gets boring. And maybe that's where I'm wrong. Maybe when I cook, maybe I need to do more of just kind of just doing whatever feels right in the moment. Who knows, it might work, might not, but if it does,
yeah, give it a shot. I tend to be, if it says a half cup of flour, it's going to be a half a cup and not an ounce more, because I don't have a lot of experience in that, so I try to rely on what chefs and experts know.
When I bake, I do that. I feel like with baking, you have to be very precise, but with cooking, you can be a little more.
Take a risk.
More. Yeah, a little bit more. Yeah. Well, what time is it? What do we got? What are we at?
Hour 30.
Oh, we're good. We're good. What else we got?
I'm not
What's
sure.
happening?
I'm getting ready for week 1 of the fantasy season.
All right.
So back to media.
Yep.
Last year I finished ahead of both my boys in our fantasy leagues.
All right.
Goal 1
Here we go.
goal 1 accomplished. Now I got to try and win the league this year and win a couple bucks along the way.
All right. Yeah, I know. That was the one thing when I work at Condado's now, just on Liberty Avenue, and all the guys, and I'm not a sports guy really at all, except for watching disc golf, but all the guys down there are talking about it, like getting the fantasy league together, betting some money, trying to win, and they keep asking me if I want to join it. I'm like, I would have no idea even where to start. I would just be picking random, and maybe that's a strategy. I would just be picking random names. I'd have no idea.
Yeah, in my leagues, they usually try to find those people because they want your money. You know nothing about fantasy football, would love to have you in our league.
They're trying to recruit me because they know they're going to get me. Yeah. If there was a fantasy disc golf league, now that's tougher. That's an individual sport. That's a tougher one to gauge. Mm-hmm. And especially now is like when I'm watching it every week, there's no way of knowing who's going to win. Yeah. There's no I mean, even like the World Championships just happened. And the guy that's currently, I think he's the best that's ever played. He's a 6-time world champion, which there are people that have more championships than that. But it was back in the 80s and 90s whenever there was barely anybody playing the sport, and when the actual disc technology wasn't very good and the courses weren't that tough. And now in the 2010s and the 2020s, he picked up 6 world championships. And in the last 10 years, the streak ended, I believe the streak ended this year. But in the last 10 years, he'd either placed first or second every single time. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, well, we weren't betting for anything, but I was like, I don't want to bet against that guy. He didn't win. I don't think he got top 10.
It is hard with individual sports because whether it be frisbee golf or
tennis,
whatever, how you perform one day can be affected by so much.
Yep.
You can wake up and you're just not feeling good. You have a headache.
Yep.
My son Luke, as a wrestler in an individual sport, things like, did he have to lose weight? Does he have a migraine? Is he worried about how he did on his history test? Can absolutely affect individual performance. So I do think that makes it really, really hard because on one day a very unpredictable outcome can happen.
Yeah, at the one event a couple of months ago, the guy that won it was a less than 1% chance that he was projected to win the event. Won the event. Less than 1%. No one had heard of this guy before. He came out of nowhere, and he just won.
And that's why people rush to sites like FanDuel's and betting websites.
Yep,
because
they're trying to get a little bit in on the action.
Who's that long shot? The horse at the Kentucky Derby or the golfer who has no chance. But I have 50 to 1 odds. So if I bet $1, I can get $50.
You can get and for him that was someone that bet on him. That's a big one. I think they are starting to do a little bit of disc golf, like fantasy disc golf. I don't think I'll ever predict. I'm not plugged in that much. Mm-hmm. I'm just a casual fan. I go play on the weekends and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I've done fantasy baseball, fantasy football. I'm pretty close to retiring from fantasy baseball. I have a love-hate relationship with baseball, and as I get older and fewer and fewer friends do it every year, it's getting pretty close to the end. With fantasy football, my son Dominic, who's at W&J, senior accounting major, asked me to do his league a couple years ago. So it's a good way for me to stay in touch with him and just interact with him outside of dad and son.
Yep, that's true. Do you think fantasy baseball is getting a little less fun just because it's the Pirates, or?
I think the problem with fantasy baseball is if you go to a baseball game, whether it be in Pittsburgh or Philadelphia or Cincinnati, and you look out and you see the crowd, it's old people. And baseball has not done a very good job of recruiting 5, 10, 15-year-olds to play, to pay attention to. When I was growing up in Ligonier, about an hour outside of Pittsburgh, I listened to the Pirates every night. I watched them on TV. Willie Stargell was my favorite player, and the Pirates were really good, and they were contending every year, and they won 2 World Series in the 1970s. It brought the whole community together. But if you travel around Pennsylvania, cities that used to have 8 or 10 Little League teams now have 3 or 4.
Yeah.
So young people are not playing baseball. They're playing Frisbee golf. They're playing football. They're playing soccer. They're playing lacrosse. So baseball has declined in popularity among kids. And the people who watch baseball are 60, 70, 80 years old.
Yep.
And that should frighten baseball teams because their demographic is dying off every single year. So fantasy baseball suffers from the same demographic challenge that regular baseball suffers from, Major League Baseball suffers from. Fewer people are interested.
Football doesn't seem to have that problem, to me at least. Like, I feel like football is still pretty popular among people my age. I've never really been into baseball. Like, I've never really been into sports, but if I have to watch one, I think the last one I'm picking is baseball, probably.
I grew up playing baseball, playing Little League, playing Pony League, and it was what you did in the summer.
Yep.
It was the summer sport in Ligonier, and I competed with all my friends. And I look back, and those are fabulous memories. And I'd love to get back and see some of those kids I played Little League, Pony League baseball with, and just kind of catch up where they went in life. But Major League Baseball, it's no longer an elite popular sport. It's every year it's being crowded out. The NBA, NHL is doing better, and I wonder if I were a kid today, would I play lacrosse? Would I learn how to golf? I'm not sure I would play baseball the same way I did growing up.
Yeah. We played a little bit of baseball when I was a kid. Not too much, but we definitely played some. I played in like a little league for a couple of seasons. Wasn't really super into it, but yeah, that's true. And do you think those? And I know they made a couple of rule changes to baseball recently. They did something with the pitch. The pitch clock got changed, and I wonder if they were thinking that might bring some popularity back to the sport. And from what I've heard, it has made games more exciting to watch. Yeah. But maybe that's not enough to save it. Hopefully, baseball doesn't just go away. That probably wouldn't be. It's the American pastime. We can't lose baseball.
Couple things happened with baseball, and one of them was analytics, that you applied statistics to baseball, and strategies like bunting and hitting and running declined as you applied analytics to them. They got rid of that. Bunting doesn't make sense. Let's get rid of that. You shouldn't try and steal bases. That doesn't make sense. So baseball became a strikeout, a walk, or a home run, and that's not really something. There's no strategy. So Major League Baseball is trying to go back to the game it was in the 60s and 70s and 80s, where people would come. Baseball games were becoming 3, 4, and 5 hours and 7 pitching changes. And all of those things were done because they increased the likelihood that you were going to win the baseball game, which is the ultimate goal. But they made the product much worse.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that's maybe one of the reasons why I did sort of fall in love with, not that I keep, listen, I'm not trying to recruit you to play disc golf, I promise. This is not an advert, but it sort of is. The one reason why I gravitated towards it so much when I was, like, during COVID was that because it's an individual sport, it's easier to look for individuals when they're playing, like at the professional level. And there are some guys that, like, the reason why I like to watch them play is not because they're the best, not because they're placing top 10 every week, but because they throw the shots that nobody else thinks to throw. And it doesn't always work, but when it does, it's really cool. Like, just the attempt of, and I think maybe that's what you're saying with baseball, is like they took away some of those other strategies in the game that maybe just gave it more variety, made it more fun to watch.
When baseball is predictable, a walk, a strikeout, a home run, there's not enough action, and I think people get bored. People need to understand baseball grew up in a time when society was very different. So baseball was created 1880s, started to grow 1890s, early 1900s. You were a small town, you had very little to do, and you could go to a baseball game and watch all day.
Yep.
Okay. In 2023, you have 5 million things to do online, cell phone, in your community, and baseball is never going to hold the same role in a community that it once did. And baseball is going to struggle if the product doesn't become more exciting to watch. Try and put a 10-year-old in front of a baseball game and, oh, this is boring. Nothing ever happens. You watch an NFL game, people get hit. You watch a hockey game, people score goals. Baseball, well, maybe you hit a home run now and again.
Maybe they should cover the field in something like slippery, something. Wouldn't it be really funny if a guy was running to first base and he was like what if it was ice? Like, I don't want him to get hurt, but I'm just trying to think of like just something funny. Just like, what if it was like an obstacle course to get to first base? No, I'm just throwing stuff out there. But it's true. I think that I've always said that I think it's a lot more fun to play than it is to watch.
I still play softball, so I'm the baseball generation. Baseball better find a way for kids to play Little League, for people to go to their high school baseball games, who want to play at college. And right now there's a disconnect. Young people aren't interested in the product of baseball, and I hope it changes. I'm not sure. It's like going back to how do you save the local newspaper. It's a bigger challenge. And is it possible that baseball could become like the local newspaper? Maybe. The demographics for games, look at who's in the crowd, aren't great.
Yeah, I know some people here. I got my roommate last year. She loves going to Pirates games. Like, she was big into that. So that's something. But yeah, I've never really. I mean, I've only been to a handful of Pirates games in my life, but it's also because it's the Pirates. That doesn't help. That it's that. But yeah, hopefully it doesn't.
It's a beautiful stadium.
It's a gorgeous stadium. It's got a great view of the city. It's like
Yeah.
it should be. That should be the place to go. Heinz Field is nice and all. I think Heinz Field does have a nice view of the city too. But PNC Park, it feels so accessible. Like for us,
Yeah.
it's so easy for us to walk there, and to go, and the fireworks are always great. And yeah, it is. It's I mean, I'll go on $1 hot dog night. I'll go then. I'll go then for that. But yeah, it is a really nice stadium. More people should go.
But baseball's product right now, people are trying to change it. And maybe what they come up with will be popular like it was in the 70s. But it hasn't happened yet. You see minor changes. You see more young people paying a little more attention. But it's still not up there with other sports like hockey, like basketball, like the NFL. People get excited about the Steelers.
Yeah, they do.
And the first game this year, it is one of the shared viewing experiences by families. I mentioned earlier about how I'm in one room watching old TV shows, and Wendy's watching cooking shows, and Luke's watching football. NFL brings everybody together in Pittsburgh. When you have an NFL team, people pay attention to it.
Yeah.
Parents are high-fiving kids, and you go to school and you talk about the Steeler game, but the NFL is a little different than other leagues, and I don't see the same engagement, same passion for other sports.
Yeah, downtown's alive during the day of a Steelers. If it's a home game, there are people out there. Like when I'm at work at Condados, it's packed every time because people still get excited. But that's also maybe because there's not like Steelers Nation is a thing. There's Steeler fans everywhere. And maybe it's not the same for the Pirates or for the Penguins. I didn't realize how big of a hockey city Pittsburgh was. I thought that it was like that everywhere.
Pittsburgh's a pretty passionate hockey town. Haven't experienced the Penguins winning the cup.
Yeah.
It's a huge deal. And Penguin fans are really, really passionate. And an awful lot of teenagers do like playing hockey. It's an expensive sport.
It is.
And not all high schools have it. But there's definitely interest in hockey. And going to a Penguin game, a lot of fun.
It's a lot of fun. Yeah. I've got a cousin right now that's in that's at trying to get into the NHL. Yeah, my bad. Yeah, he's going to for a goalie. He's going to a goalie school up in Connecticut, I think.
Nice.
Doing that. Yeah, it's cool. And that's fun to go watch. I haven't watched him play a lot, but hockey is fun to watch. I'm not like I said, not a big sports guy, but I'd say if I had to watch anything, I'm probably picking hockey. Hockey's fun to watch.
Hockey's exciting. There's a lot of action. Most people can understand it.
Yep.
There's some contact. People tend to be engaged with contact sports. So hockey has an awful lot going for it. And the Penguins, over the last 40 years, have just been a great, great franchise with the Stanley Cups they've brought home. The tough thing that's coming up for the Penguins is their core has gotten old. Sidney Crosby, does he have 2 more years? Does he have 3 more years? Does he have 4 more years?
That dude's been playing for so long.
Yeah, and he had a concussion history, and he had some physical ailments. And at some point, is he going to say, I'm tired of being beaten up. I'm tired of getting hit in the head.
Yeah.
I think the Pens are going to have a long rebuilding project when Crosby and maybe Malcolm and
Letang's been on the team for a long time. Yeah, I remember, and again, I wasn't I just remember hearing it on the radio, when I was a kid, whenever Sidney Crosby came to the Penguins. And it was this young kid. And then it's just weird to think that he's never gone anywhere else. He's never been on it. He's been with the Penguins this whole time.
It is amazing how athletics affects your childhood, because my oldest boy, Dominic, grew up as Ben Roethlisberger was drafted, became a Steeler,
Yep.
and when he was in elementary school and when he was in junior high and high school and even
Yeah.
college, Ben Roethlisberger leading the Steelers was what he knew.
Yeah.
And when he retired, you could see he was almost had a tear in his eye.
Yeah, you grew up with that guy. You
because-
grew up with that guy leading the team.
Yeah, it's almost like a family member. It said, I'm retiring, I'm leaving.
Yeah.
You're not going to see me anymore. But I think it shows the profound effect that professional sports have on communities, and especially Pittsburgh.
Yeah, that feels like, I'm sure it's other places too, but I've really only known Pittsburgh. But yeah, I remember people loved that guy. People loved Big Ben. When he left, yeah, it's going to be Reuben Crosby leaves the Penguins. Yeah. And it's weird that it's like, I think goes what we were saying, like, I can't say that about a single player on the Pirates. Other than maybe when McCutcheon left, that was a little bit of something because people loved him. But yeah, that is a weird thing.
In baseball's economics changed. It used to be you were drafted by a team and you would stay with that team for almost your whole career or for your whole career. Roberto Clemente, once he was picked up in the Rule 5 draft, was only a Pittsburgh Pirate. Willie Stargell, except for maybe the last year of his career, was a Pittsburgh Pirate. So cities were able to keep their stars, the beloved players. Willie Stargell would be there for 5, 10, 15 years. Well, now baseball free agency after 6 years. And if you're a smaller market like Pittsburgh, it is very, very hard to keep Andrew McCutcheon after those 6 years.
Yeah.
They can go to larger markets, New York, Los Angeles, and make much, much, much more money. So small market teams lose their stars. And the result of that for the fan from Latrobe is they don't feel the same connection to the team.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely don't. But I know that a lot of people out there like love players on the Penguins and the Steelers. It's a different thing. Yeah, Pittsburgh's cool. I love it here. I'm never leaving. I don't think I'm ever going to leave.
I spent 14 years in Alabama prior to this, and Alabama, great fans too. So I was in Birmingham. The Atlanta Braves were about 2 hours away, so big Atlanta Brave. And then Alabama and Auburn football, also very, very big. So I appreciate Pittsburgh because I think it's really, really special for fans and the connection between fans and professional teams.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, I think we can wrap up here. Professor, thank you.
I appreciate you both.
I appreciate
so
your
much.
time.
Thank you.
It was a lot of
Have
fun.
a great day.
You too. Bye, everybody.